What if gravity didn't pull? What if it pushed? Imagine that for a moment. Instead of things falling down, they would fly up, or rather fly away from each other. Every single particle in the universe, instead of having a tiny attractive force, would have a tiny repulsive one. This isn't just a small change, it flips everything we know on its head. It's not just a different kind of physics, it's a different kind of existence. Think about the very beginning, the Big Bang. If gravity was repulsive, the universe wouldn't just be expanding, it would be exploding outwards with incredible force. Every bit of matter, every atom, every loose particle would be actively trying to get as far away from every other particle as possible. Our universe is full of things clumping together, stars, galaxies, planets. That's all because of gravity pulling things in. In a repulsive gravity universe, none of that could happen. There would be no stars. Stars form when massive clouds of gas and dust collapse under their own gravity. Well, they get denser and hotter until nuclear fusion starts. But if gravity pushed, those clouds would never collapse. And they would just spread out thinner and thinner. So no suns, no burning balls of gas giving off light and heat. The universe would be incredibly dark. It would be cold, too, an almost perfect vacuum, just incredibly diffuse particles drifting away from each other forever. And if there are no stars, there are no galaxies. Galaxies are vast collections of stars, gas, and dust, all bound together by gravity. They spin, they collide, they merge. But in a repulsive universe, everything would be pushing everything else apart. There would be no swirling arms of light, no cosmic islands, just endless, expanding nothingness with tiny, isolated specks of matter moving further and further apart. The night sky wouldn't exist as we know it. There would be no distant lights to gaze at. It's black, absolute black. This also means no heavy elements. Stars are like cosmic factories. They fuse hydrogen into helium, then helium into carbon, and so on, up to iron. When massive stars explode, they create even heavier elements and scatter them across the cosmos. These elements are the building blocks for planets and for life. Without stars, the universe would pretty much just be hydrogen and helium, the lightest elements. Maybe a tiny bit of lithium. Everything else would be incredibly rare if it existed at all. So no planets. Planets form from the leftover material around a star, clumping together. Asteroids bump into each other and stick, growing bigger and bigger. But with repulsive gravity, nothing would stick. Everything would bounce off and push away. You couldn't have a solid body like Earth. You couldn't have a gas giant like Jupiter. Everything would disperse. There would be no ground to stand on. No surfaces. Just an endless three-dimensional void. What would matter even be like? Atoms themselves are held together by much stronger forces than gravity, the strong nuclear force for the nucleus, and the electromagnetic force for electrons orbiting. So atoms would still exist, molecules would still exist because chemical bonds are electromagnetic. But imagine a piece of rock. Every atom in that rock would be trying to push every other atom away, even if the electromagnetic forces were holding them in molecular structures. To make anything solid, it would need incredibly strong internal bonds to overcome this constant outward push. A simple stone would be under immense stress. It would always be trying to fly apart. If you hit it hard enough to break a few bonds, the pieces wouldn't just separate, they'd explode outwards from each other. These materials would have to be designed for internal compression, for holding themselves together with extreme force rather than for tensile strength or resisting a pull. Building anything would be like trying to hold back an explosion all the time. And if you build something, it wouldn't just sit there. It would be pushing away from everything else around it. So, how would you even have a structure? It would need to be constantly fighting against the universe's natural inclination to spread out. Given all this, life as we know it seems impossible. Life needs a stable environment. It needs liquid water, a range of temperatures, a source of energy, and a concentration of elements. None of that would be available in a universe with repulsive gravity. No planets, no suns, just cold, dark, spreading gas. But let's push the thought experiment further. Let's say, by some incredible miracle, life did find a way to emerge. What would it be like? It couldn't be multicellular in the same way we are. Our cells are held together partly by gravity and certainly by the molecular bonds that make up our tissues. But imagine every cell trying to push away from its neighbors. Our bodies would need to be incredibly strong just to stay intact. Perhaps life would be extremely small, single-celled, floating in sparse gas clouds. Or maybe it would form in tiny, super-dense pockets where electromagnetic forces somehow manage to overcome the repulsion locally. These would be like microscopic, self-contained universes of intense pressure. They wouldn't be very big, though. The larger they got, the harder it would be to keep them from dispersing. If these life forms needed energy, they couldn't get it from a sun. So They would have to be chemosynthetic, living off chemical reactions from the rare elements they could find. Perhaps they would float and filter the extremely dilute gas for specific molecules. Their metabolism would have to be incredibly efficient, able to extract energy from almost nothing. And movement would be another challenge. There's no ground to push off of, so how do you move? Maybe by expelling waste products with force, essentially rocket propulsion on a microscopic scale. Every movement would be a push, a directed explosion. You push off yourself or off the sparse matter around you, propelling yourself away from it. Now, imagine these theoretical life forms somehow evolving into something sentient. What would their bodies be like? They would likely be incredibly compact and dense. Every part of them would be tightly bound, perhaps with very strong, specialized internal structures designed to resist the constant outward pressure. They wouldn't have bones for support against gravity. They would have bones, or something like them, for compression to hold themselves together. Their shape might be spherical, the most efficient shape for containing internal pressure. Or maybe they would be elongated, designed to allow parts to push off each other for movement, using their own body mass as a launch pad. They wouldn't have limbs that dangle limbs would need to be actively held in place, or designed to extend by internal pressure and retract with active force. There would be no up or down for these beings. Their entire existence would be in a three-dimensional void, and direction would be purely relative towards that distant cloud, away from that other drifting entity. They would navigate by a sense of push and repulsion, detecting subtle variations in the force field around them. How would they build anything? Our buildings have foundations that resist the pull of gravity and structures that support weight. Their buildings would need to be sealed, pressurized capsules constantly exerting inward force to prevent themselves from flying apart. Imagine a city that isn't built on a surface, but is a vast, self-contained, constantly compressing collection of structures floating in the void. Each building would be like a small, controlled explosion trying not to rupture. These cities wouldn't stay in one place unless they were actively anchored to something equally massive and compressed, or if they had propulsion systems to constantly counteract the repulsion from other nearby structures. They would be more like slow-moving, self-contained starships drifting through the darkness. Their engineers would be masters of internal pressure, of materials that can withstand unimaginable strain, and of active containment fields. Think about resources. Where do you get the material to build these high-pressure habitats? If the universe is mostly hydrogen and helium, and heavy elements are rare, then every atom of metal, every bit of complex compound would be incredibly precious. They would have to scavenge the void, perhaps collecting very rare, scattered remnants of more complex structures that somehow formed or were discarded by other life. Mining would involve capturing and condensing extremely diffuse matter, an energy-intensive process. The society would be fundamentally nomadic. There would be no permanent settlements, no fixed homes in our sense. Every community would be a traveling unit, always moving, always needing to manage its internal cohesion and its repulsion from other communities. An interaction between different groups would require careful navigation, perhaps using controlled propulsion to approach without pushing each other away too violently. Communication over vast distances would be crucial. If everything is spreading out, then sending a message that can reach another moving community across light years of emptiness would be incredibly hard. They might rely on very powerful, directed energy beams, or perhaps some form of communication that exploits the repulsive force itself, sending ripples through the fabric of space that push on other objects. What would their technology be like? Power generation would be a huge challenge. No suns for solar power, no planets for geothermal. They might harness the energy released by matter pushing itself apart, or by carefully controlled reactions of the rare heavy elements they could find. Perhaps they would have developed ways to manipulate the repulsive force itself, creating localized fields of reduced repulsion to allow for easier interaction, or enhanced repulsion for propulsion. Their transportation would be based on pushing. To move from one place to another, you'd need to actively push against the surrounding emptiness, or against a carefully positioned countermass. Imagine spaceships that don't just rocket forward, but are constantly pushing away from the destination they want to reach, using that push to accelerate, then flipping around and pushing away from their starting point to slow down. Or maybe they would have systems that locally reverse the repulsive force, creating temporary zones of attraction, allowing them to fall towards what they want to reach. That would be advanced tech indeed. Daily life would be a constant negotiation with this force. Imagine eating. Your food, once inside you, would be trying to push itself apart and trying to push away from your stomach lining. Digestion would be an active process of holding food together and breaking it down against its will to disperse. Every meal would be a battle of containment. Sleeping wouldn't involve lying down. There's no down. You'd need to tether yourself, or sleep in a snug, pressurized compartment that holds you gently but firmly. Or perhaps they would have developed a way to enter a state of deep relaxation where their own internal force is balanced, creating a sensation of weightlessness, but an active rather than passive weightlessness. Children learning to move wouldn't learn to crawl or walk against gravity. They would learn to subtly push off surfaces, to control their internal propulsion, to navigate the three-dimensional void with precision. A child accidentally pushing too hard might find themselves rapidly accelerating away from their parents, requiring complex retrieval efforts. The concept of falling would be very different. To fall would mean to lose control of your repulsion management, to be rapidly pushed away from something you intended to stay near. It would be an acceleration away from a perceived center, not towards one. Every interaction with matter would be a conscious act of control. To shake someone's hand would require an immense amount of precision, ensuring you don't push them away or get pushed away yourself. Hugging would be an act of intense, controlled compression, holding each other together against the universe's natural tendency to separate. Their art might celebrate themes of unity, of containment, of the beauty of things that hold together despite the cosmic push to separate. Sculptures might be massive, intricate structures held together by internal forces defying dispersion. Music might be about complex patterns of sound waves pushing through the void, carrying meaning across distances. Their literature might focus on the struggle for connection, the brief, precious moments of closeness in an isolating cosmos. Their understanding of the universe would be shaped by this fundamental repulsion. For us, the universe is full of things coming together, forming structures, growing in complexity, at least locally. For them, the universe would be one of constant divergence, of things flying apart, of an ever-increasing emptiness. Their philosophy might center on the ephemeral nature of all things, the impossibility of true permanence, and the beauty of fleeting connections. The search for meaning would be profound. If the universe is always spreading out, always becoming less dense, less connected, then what is the purpose of existing? Perhaps they would find purpose in the very act of existing, in the defiance of coming together, even for a moment, against the overwhelming push to scatter. They would be acutely aware of loneliness. The sheer vastness of space, combined with everything pushing away, means encounters would be incredibly rare. Finding another sentient being, or even another complex structure, would be an event of monumental significance. Every interaction would be cherished, every community a miracle of shared will. Their history would be a story of overcoming dispersion. Their greatest heroes might be those who found ways to hold things together, to create stability, to forge lasting bonds in a universe that rejects them. They might revere the ancient engineers who first built truly self-sustaining habitats, or the navigators who first made contact with another isolated community. The concept of death would be literal dispersion. To die would mean losing the internal strength, the will, the energy to hold oneself together, and simply letting go, letting the body scatter into individual molecules, eventually floating away into the infinite void. Burial would be impossible. Perhaps rituals would involve a controlled, dignified dispersion, a scattering of a loved one's essence into the emptiness from which it so valiantly resisted for a time. This universe with repulsive gravity is a place of ultimate emptiness and profound struggle. It's a universe that actively tries to prevent anything from being. For anything complex, anything stable, anything alive to exist, it would be a constant, monumental act of defiance against the very fabric of reality. It makes our universe, with its gentle, persistent pull of gravity, seem like a warm, welcoming, and incredibly generous place, a universe designed for connections and coming together.